This is the March 2nd, 2021 meeting of the City of Charleston Board of Zoning Appeals Zoning. Present are Mr. Morrison, Mr. Judon, Ms. Grass, Ms. Richards, Ms. Vargas, Mr. Bennett, and Mr. Robinson. Present from the planning staff are Ms. Ellington, Ms. Ashby, and Ms. Batchelder. These proceedings are being recorded, and we ask that those who speak identify themselves for the record. We'll conduct this meeting in usual fashion. We'll first receive information from city staff about the application and the recommendation. If the recommendation is favorable and no one objects to the application, usually the Board of Zoning Appeals treats the matter as being uncontested and passes it as a matter of course. If, however, the city recommends against the application or there is opposition to the application, we treat the application as contested and hear from the applicant and anyone else who is in favor of the application. Next, we hear from anyone opposed, followed by a short rebuttal from the applicant. We then close the public hearing portion of the meeting for that particular application and open discussion to the Board of Zoning Appeals members only. We'll then make a decision to approve with conditions, or deny the application. The Board of Zoning Appeals zoning has the authority to do three things. First, to hear appeals to decisions of the zoning administrator. Two, to grant special exceptions, which is a fact-finding function of the board. And three, to grant variances to the zoning ordinance if the application meets the hardship test outlined in section 54(9)24 of the ordinance. The board may deliberate and make a final decision on a matter by a majority vote of members present at the hearing and qualified to vote, provided that not less than a quorum is present and qualified to vote. However, an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the board members present and voting shall be required before a use variance may be granted. For a variance to be granted, the Board of Zoning Appeals must make the following findings. A, that there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. B, these conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. C, because of these conditions, the application of the ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. And D, the authorization of a variance will not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent property or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. On the agenda tonight, item number 1, review of minutes, will be deferred to the next meeting of the board. Also on the agenda, item number 6, which is 157 Wentworth Street, has been withdrawn and will not be heard. Item number 7, number 80 Ashley Avenue, has been deferred and will be heard at a later meeting of the board. First item on the agenda for tonight is B1, 363, 367, and 369 King Street. Requests a second one-year extension of a vested right that expires on April 3rd, 2021, pursuant to section 54(9)62. Vested right pertains to a special exception granted with conditions under section 54-511 for 21 parking spaces to allow 9,139 square feet of retail space and 70 dwelling units, zone MU-2/WH. Mr. Batchelder.
This is a request to extend an approval that was originally granted back in 2018 for one more year. And the approval concerns this property on King Street. 363 to 369 King Street, and a proposed redevelopment of the property. So, and I have all the information about that approval if the board would like to see that, but my recommendation is that you grant the 1-year extension. This approval, nothing has changed. There have been no amendments to the zoning ordinance that preclude or prohibit any aspect of this development since the original approval was granted back in 2018. So pursuant to the vested rights laws for the city that follow the state laws, I recommend that this 1-year extension be granted.
City recommends approval in this vested right if no changes occur in the application. Vested right is entitled to by the applicant. Does anyone wish to speak on this item? Has anyone signed up to speak?
No, Mr. Robertson, no one has signed up to speak.
Very good. Motion for approval is made by Mr. Morrison and seconded by Mr. Judon. All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Morrison? Mr. Morrison?
Sorry, I had to unmute.
Mr. Judon?
Aye.
Ms. Grass?
Aye.
Ms. Richards?
Aye.
Ms. Vargas?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion is unanimously approved. Item number 2 on the agenda is 179 3rd Avenue, Wagner Terrace. Request variance from section 54-301 to allow subdivision to create 3 lots with lot size of lot A 4,075 square feet, lot size of lot C 4,411 square feet, 6,000 square feet required. Request a variance from section 54-824 to allow 3 lots that do not meet the minimum 67-foot lot frontage requirement on a public right-of-way. Lot frontages for lot A is 38.8 feet, lot B is 59.2 feet, lot C is 42 feet. Request a variance from section 54-301 to allow lot B with a 3.5-foot west side setback, 9 feet required, zoned SR2. Mr. Bennett, excuse me, Mr. Batchelder.
Thank you. This is a residential property in Wagner Terrace. And I think it was a couple of years ago, there was an application before you to allow for variances that would allow more development on this lot, which is currently occupied by 1 single family residence. And that was denied by the board. But the applicant has come back with a revised proposal. And instead of pursuing the plan that they had before, they are instead wanting to just simply subdivide or re-subdivide this property to create 3 lots, 1 for the main house, the existing house on the lot, and 2 vacant lots that would allow future single-family homes to be constructed on them. So this is the location in Wagner Terrace on 3rd Avenue, mid-block. The applicant submitted this application, provided information about their request and an explanation of how they feel they meet the variance test, and additional information about the property. And one thing you'll see, so the single family zoning applies to the entire block where the property is located. And so you see the subject property right here. And all of the other properties on that block have a single family residential zoning, but as you can see from this zoning map, well, a map that has the zoning but also shows the existing uses, there are a few properties that do not have single family homes. So immediately to the east is a fiveplex, a 5-unit residential building. And then the two properties to the west are both duplexes. And then across the street, you see the Bordelot, which is 16 condominium units on a property that's zoned for that use. But nevertheless, it's a more intensive use than the block to the south, which is zoned single family. So, and then Lowndes Grove is just to the west of this block, to give you another landmark in the neighborhood. Here's an aerial view. Bordelot is this building right here in the foreground. Single family residence over here, I believe. Maybe it's more than 1 unit, but here's the fiveplex that is located to the east. And these are the two duplexes to the west. And then this is the subject property. Existing home is situated in the middle of that lot. So this is the zoning map showing the zoning that I've just described. This is the map that we use to just simply come up with the average frontage requirement, lot frontage requirement based on the surrounding lots. And we came up with 67.33, which is 67 feet. So, and that's not an issue. It's just simply the variance that's being requested from that number. And I just wanted to show you that we included these lots, these 3 lots over here, and the 3 lots to the south, which are on Gordon Street, immediately to the rear of the existing lot. We did not include this property over here, which is a fiveplex, not 4 units, but a fiveplex. And we did not include the Bordelot, which is zoned multifamily. So that's how we came up with that number. Here are photographs of the existing property, a large yard with the house in the middle. The house was built about 1960, I believe. And more photographs. This is a plat that shows the proposed subdivision of the property. So you can see the existing house here, and the proposed lot lines are located here and here. This lot line on the west side is closer to the house than is otherwise permitted by the zoning of the property. So that's the variance request to allow the setback variances. Then you see the lot frontages that are proposed here, 38.8 feet, 59.2 feet, and 42 feet. And that is another variance request on your agenda. And then the other one is the lot size. You see the size of new lot A is 4,075 square feet. New lot C is 4,411 square feet. And the lot where the house is located would be over 6,000 square feet. Now, this is a 1919 recorded plat showing the original subdivision of that part of Wagner Terrace. And I've highlighted the lots that 167 or 179 3rd Avenue is comprised of. So original lot 5, 1, 2, and part of lot 3 are the original lots that make up 179 3rd Avenue. So originally, this was 3.5 lots, not one large lot. And these lots were 42 feet in width. In 1992, this plat was recorded to abandon those original property lines. You can see, and here's a blow up of that image. You see the original lot line here being abandoned, this original lot line being abandoned, and this original lot line being abandoned. So for some reason, the owner back then decided they didn't want to maintain those lot lines and do something in the future. They just said, we want to make it all one lot. So they abandoned those lines. And that's why I'm referring to this as a re-subdivision. And that's why the surveyor actually has referred to it as a re-subdivision. And these are other images that the applicant provided. Again, this is the property in question right here. Give you an idea of the size of this lot relative to the other single family lots in the neighborhood. Another image. And then this deck, which is on the side of the house, would be removed as part of this subdivision. So that takes us back to the proposal, the proposed plat showing that proposed subdivision. And we feel that they meet the variance test and recommend approval to you of this request. And the applicant has done their homework and they've reached out to neighbors. And I have a petition that states at the top, 179 3rd Avenue. I support the reestablishment of the original lot lines as proposed for single family homes. I do not support multifamily condos or apartments for this property. And it's signed by 25 people, if I counted correctly. And most of these people are within close proximity to this property. All of the immediate neighbors around this property have signed according to the applicant and from the signatures that I see and the addresses that are listed with those signatures. And then there are a few other folks in Wagner Terrace that have signed, and maybe one or two people I saw that do not live in Wagner Terrace but do live nearby. So the applicant has contacted the neighbors, and the neighbors, according to this petition, seem to be in support of this proposal. So I believe they've met the variance test and recommend approval of this request.
City moves for approval. Ms. Ashby, is anyone here in opposition?
No, sir, no one in opposition.
City moves approval. The motion for approval is by Ms. Grass, seconded by Ms. Richards. All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Morrison?
I have a question, if I may, Mr. Robinson, just for Mr. Batchelder. So Lee, I don't quite know how to justify the average frontage requirement with and balance it against neighbors not opposed to ignoring the average frontage. And you know, is the rule the city follows that the average frontage requirement can be ignored if there's neighborhood support? I mean, is that?
No, that my basis for this is the fact that, number one, this was originally 3 lots. So,
But on that, stop on that. I understand that originally the layout of the subdivision, Wagner Terrace had smaller lots. But the way it's developed over the years, the average frontage is much bigger than the original, at least as it applies immediately here, much bigger than the original layouts. So, I mean, the development didn't follow the plan in that regard, it seems to me. But maybe if I saw more, I mean, that's the curious thing to me. Here we have a development that had smaller lots in mind, but numbers of owners have acquired 2 or 3 lots, it appears, and then built according to owning more lots. Apparently the lots weren't priced high enough or something, but I'm not going to get in the way of the neighbors who vote against this thing, but it's just something I'd like to understand better, I think, because you do have the issue of the lot width.
Well, I'll be happy to give you a more detailed explanation of exactly why, under the variance test, I think this meets the requirements, and we can certainly let the applicant speak too if that's necessary, because I'm sure they're on this call. So would you like me to give you a more detailed explanation?
No, I'll move to approve. We can talk about it later.
Okay.
We have a motion already, Mr. Morrison.
Oh, sorry.
Assuming there are no other questions. Are there any other questions? Comments? It was moved by Ms. Grass and seconded by Ms. Richards. All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Morrison.
Aye.
Mr. Judon.
Aye.
Ms. Grass.
Aye.
Ms. Richards.
Aye.
Ms. Vargas.
Aye.
Mr. Bennett.
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye, and the motion is unanimously approved. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is 2319 Bertie Garrett Street, Rosemont. Request a special exception under section 54501 to allow construction of a single-family residence on a lot of insufficient size. Lot area 3,000 square feet, 9,000 square feet required. Request a variance from section 54301 to allow construction of a single-family residence with a 5-foot west side setback, a 15-foot total side setback, 9 feet and 18 feet required. Zoned SR1. Mr. Batcho.
So this is a vacant lot in Rosemont, and this map shows its location. You can see that from this map that many of the lots in this neighborhood are the same size as this lot. And one of the issues that's before you tonight is allowing a single-family residence to be built on this lot. It's only 3,000 square feet. The zoning that the city gave this neighborhood requires 9,000 square feet. So there's a big discrepancy there. But most of these lots do have homes on them already, and so I just want to point that out, and I'll show you in a minute. So here's the subject lot, and this vacant lot, what appears to be a vacant lot immediately to this would be to the west, actually does have a house on it now, and that house was approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals for the same requests, and it was approved last June. But the point I want to make first is that there are numerous lots in this neighborhood that are the same size and already have homes on them. So number one, I think it would be unreasonable to not permit a single family residence to be built on this lot because of its size. And you'll see that they've come up with a plan that fits very nicely on the lot. So again, here's a photograph of the lot. It's actually this lot over here. And then we'll go to the plan. So you can see the house right here that has been built on the neighboring lot. It may not be finished, but it's very far along. And that house is exactly the same design as the proposed house for this lot. So on this site plan, you see the house next door that was approved last June with its driveway over here for parking and the footprint of the house. And then you see the subject property is a vacant lot on this image. And here you see the proposed footprint of the house fitting within those setback lines. Now I'll say that this setback over here, which is a 5-foot setback off of the side property line, that is where the second variance that's listed on your agenda applies. So this is a variance to allow a single family residence with a 5-foot west side setback and then a 15-foot total side setback versus 9 feet being required and 18 feet being required for the total. You'll also notice that on this neighboring lot, the house was situated with a 5-foot east side setback. So those two side setbacks, side setback variances were positioned relative to each other. And this plan does provide the parking. So the only issue is that side setback and total side setback issue and the size of the lot. These are plans showing the house. It's elevated to meet FEMA requirements. It will be 14 feet wide by 42 feet long, 2 stories with 2 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and include just over 1,100 square feet of floor space. Second floor and the design. This is affordable housing being constructed through a program. So just like before, we recommended approval of the variance request to permit the house to meet, to encroach into a side setback and not meet the total side setback. And also we recommended approval of the special exception to allow this new single family residence to be built on the lot. So our recommendation with this application is that you approve this request.
City recommends approval. Ms. Ashby, is there anyone here present that is in opposition?
No, Mr. Robinson, no opposition.
Any questions or comments from the board? Ms. Vargas moves for approval, seconded by Mr. Bennett. All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Morrison?
Aye.
Mr. Judon?
Aye.
Ms. Grass?
Aye.
Ms. Richards? Ms. Richards?
Aye.
Ms. Vargas?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion is unanimously approved. Thank
Mr.
you.
Robinson, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Who seconded the motion again? Thank you.
Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, sir.
Next item on the agenda is 33 Hester Street, Wagner Terrace. Request special exception under section 54-110 to allow a one-story addition, master bedroom expansion closet that extends the non-conforming 20.9 feet front yard setback, 6.1 foot rear setback, 27 foot total front and rear setback, 25 feet and 50 feet required, zoned SR2. Mr. Batchelder.
This is a existing home in Wagner Terrace, and the proposal is to construct a one-story addition on the side of the existing house that will extend those non-conforming front and rear setbacks. So here's the location of the lot on the corner of Hester and West Poplar. The house faces Hester Street, so you can see right away that there's not going to be a very large front yard or backyard, but very large side yards. This is the application material. There's a photograph showing the existing house, an aerial photo showing that existing house, and you can faintly see the one-story addition on the Poplar Street side of the house. Zoning map of the property showing SR2 zoning and a site plan. So the addition is this area right here. So it's 6 feet and 1 inch wide, and it is as deep as the house right now. And you see that it's extending the rear 6 foot 5 inch setback, which is a non-conforming setback, and the existing 20 foot 10 and a half inch front setback. And under this proposal, existing is on the right rather, and proposed is on the left of this drawing. Very small addition that will enlarge a bedroom, and so that is the proposal. It's a special exception to extend a non-conforming setback, and the issue is light and air and impacts on the neighbor, and whether the extension is an unreasonable intensification of the non-conforming use. And in this case, I believe it is not an unreasonable intensification, and so I recommend approval of this request. And there is one letter of support from Amanda Gursky, the Wagner Terrace Neighborhood Association president, who indicates that they've been presented, their neighborhood association has been presented with the requested changes. The membership voted unanimously to support the changes to include extending their home towards Poplar Street in a non-conforming setback. And they urged the board to approve their application. So I feel they meet the special exception requirements for this and recommend approval.
City recommends approval. Ms. Ashby, anyone in opposition?
No, Mr. Robinson, no opposition.
Any questions or comments from the board? Move for approval is made by Mr. Morrison, seconded by Mr. Judon. All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Morrison?
Aye.
Mr. Judon?
Aye.
Ms. Grass?
Aye.
Ms. Richards?
Aye.
Ms. Vargas?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion is unanimously approved. Next item on the agenda is 241-243 East Bay Street, Anstonboro. Request special exception under section 54-110 to allow a change from a non-conforming 3-unit accommodations use to a non-conforming 4-unit accommodations use. Ordinance does not allow accommodation uses with less than 10 units, zone GBA. Mr. Batchelder.
This application concerns a commercially zoned property in Ansonboro that sits on the northwest corner of East Bay Street and Ginyard Street. The applicant filed this information and provided an explanation of why they feel they meet the special exception requirement for changing this non-conforming use. This is a zoning map that shows that the property has a general business zoning like the surrounding properties. That's the red, and the crosshatch indicates that it is within the city's accommodations overlay zone, which is the overlay zone where hotels are allowed in the city, subject to the board granting a special exception for that use. Going back to June 20th, 2017, the board did grant a special exception to allow a 2-unit accommodations use. Next, in the following year, November 20th, 2018, the board granted a special exception to add 1 more accommodations unit for a total of 3 accommodations units in this property. In October of last year, of 2019 rather, City Council ratified Ordinance 2019-94 to create an accommodations overlay zone that included new requirements that had not been part of the overlay zone when the previous request to allow accommodations units at this location were heard by the board. So in 2019, City Council adopted more stringent requirements for any future accommodations proposals, requests for special exceptions. And they included a requirement that any future special exception for an accommodations use would require a minimum of 10 sleeping units for each facility. So when the city did that, this property, because it only has 3 accommodations units, became a non-conforming use, legal non-conforming use. Now, talk a little bit more about the property. So this is aerial view looking west. You see the front of the building on East Bay Street. And immediately to the south is what is now a vacant lot, parking lot, where a 1-story building had been for many years, and it had been a restaurant for the last number of years, and that building was torn down. An approval has since been granted by the Board of Zoning Appeals to allow the redevelopment of this property, which is just to the south of Ginyard Street and fronting on East Bay Street and Market Street, and includes the surface parking lot that you see in this image right here. The approval would allow for a 50-unit accommodations use, a 50-room hotel. That project is going through the review process, and I suppose eventually will be constructed. But that is the approval that is in place for that property. And this is an aerial view looking from the south at the subject property. And you can see on the back of the property, there's ample room for parking spaces back here. This is the parking area that's on the 241, 243 East Bay Street property. In the foreground is the property I just mentioned, that includes the 50-room hotel approval. Then you see the horse stables over here, other commercial buildings and commercial uses surround this property. And of course, across the street is the large warehouse building that is owned by the State Ports Authority. These floor plans show the existing use. So, and that the area to be considered is this ground floor space right here that I'm outlining with the cursor. And then you see there are a total of 9 parking spaces on the back part of the property and images of front and side of the property. Now, the proposal is to take that space, which was originally set aside by the owner to be another use that didn't work out, and convert that space into the 4th accommodations unit. So it's the ground floor space on the north half of that ground floor. And you see it has 1 bedroom, living, kitchen area, and the study back here. A blow up of that proposed renovation shown here. And then plans that show the remaining portions of the building are shown here. So the other half of that ground floor space is Suite 100. That's one of the existing accommodations units. Upstairs on the 2nd floor is the 2nd accommodations unit. And then on the 3rd floor is the 3rd accommodations unit. So those are the 3 existing accommodations units, and the area to be considered is where that 4th unit would go. Now, I mentioned that the action of City Council in 2019 that amended the special exception or the accommodations overlay zone and the special exception requirements to require a minimum of 10 sleeping units for each accommodations facility, converted this, what had been a legally conforming use, into a legal non-conforming use. So at that point in time, the new special exception requirements that would allow the applicant to potentially apply for that 4th unit as an accommodation special exception, they disappear. That would not work because the facility would not have 10 accommodations units. So at that point, it became a legal non-conforming use, and the language really is the subsection C of section 54-110 that concerns legal non-conforming uses in the zoning ordinance, and that states that the non-conforming use of a building or lot cannot be changed to another non-conforming use unless the Board of Zoning Appeals finds that the proposed use is equally or more appropriate or more appropriate to the district than the existing non-conforming use. So it's equally appropriate or more appropriate. That's the test. And in this case, we're changing from a 3-unit accommodations use to a 4-unit accommodations use. And I don't believe that this proposal runs afoul of any other provisions in the accommodations special exception requirements, except the one about the minimum number of units being 10. So the question is this change equally appropriate or more appropriate? And I would submit that it's at least equally appropriate, if not more appropriate, given that it's moving closer to the 10-unit minimum. But be that as may, I don't think there's any real substantive difference between a 3-unit accommodations use here and a 4-unit accommodations use. The other thing is that this is not a storefront retail location, so that's part of the new standards and the new special exception test, and we don't want to displace storefront retail, at least a certain percentage of it. Well, we're not displacing that here. We're not displacing office space. So I don't think it runs afoul of any other provisions in the accommodations special exception test, except the one about the number of units. And for that reason, I recommend that this be approved as an equally appropriate or more appropriate non-conforming use. And I know we've got one letter from the Preservation Society indicating that they are opposed to this request. And so I will stop at that point and go ahead and promote the applicant, unless anybody has any questions for me.
Are there any questions from the board, Mr. Batchelder?
Mr. Batchelder, are you going to read the preservation letter or later, or how will we handle that?
Well, I think maybe I'll read it now. Let me just read it now because they've submitted it. And I'm promoting the applicant and their representatives. But this is a letter. Dear board members, the Preservation Society is opposed to this request to further intensify an existing non-conforming use. When the accommodations ordinance was recently revised and strengthened, the minimum number of 10 units was analyzed closely to prevent the proliferation of mini hotels, especially in Charleston's key commercial corridors. The express purpose of this provision was to maintain a reasonable and sustainable volume of accommodations units in the city. Thus, we cannot support the expansion of this non-conforming use, which we feel is an unreasonable intensification. We urge the board to uphold the intent of the accommodations ordinance. Thank you for considering our position in this matter. Sincerely, Aaron Minigan, Director of Historic Preservation.
Thank you.
Mr. Batchelder, I have a question. Can you provide a little bit more background on how the 10 unit number was derived? And maybe you may not know the answer. I'm just curious if you can offer a little bit more on where that number came from.
So when we were considering revisions to the accommodations ordinance, we felt like we should have a minimum number of units going forward for any new applications that might come in, because we were getting applications concerning properties on King Street and others that where people simply wanted to convert a few units within a building into an accommodations use. And we felt like really an accommodations use should have at least 10 units. And so we just came up with that number as a minimum based on the experiences that we've had in the past in terms of the approvals that have been granted and the types of projects we've seen. So there wasn't any hard science to it or anything like that, but it was just a number that we came up with that we felt was appropriate for Charleston.
Mr. Bennett, I think I can elaborate on that. I think I know where you're coming from. As you know, there are a lot of apartments above retail downtown. And we were having applications come in rather frequently in areas where there were, say, 4 or 5, even 10 apartments in a building above retail on King and Meeting Street. And one person would come in one apartment and want to, particularly if it was condo already, and create a short-term rental within a group of apartments that pre-existed that. So they'd have people living there year-round rentals, and they'd have a single short-term rental in the midst of all that, which would be maybe not too desirable.
Thank you. I think that helps.
May I follow up a second? The Preservation Society letter says that the 10-unit minimum was imposed in order to prevent the proliferation of additional hotels, meaning, I guess, hotels less than 10 units. Is that also accurate, Mr. Batchelder, in your view?
Well, I would say that it was intended to prevent a proliferation of new accommodations uses that would be less than 10 units.
Yeah. I mean, this one doesn't appear to be a proliferation issue because you already have a place that carries 3 units.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there anyone present who wishes to speak on behalf of the application?
Mr. Robinson, there is, if I can go back there is someone that wishes to speak on behalf. That's, I think, also with the applicant, and there is opposition too.
So we've got I promoted the applicant and their representatives to, and if they want to unmute themselves and speak, now is their chance. And I'll swear you in once you do.
Is the applicant present?
Maybe I need to ask them to unmute.
Yeah, Mr. Batchelder, this is John Maslin. I'm here to speak for the applicant. I don't know if you can see me, but if you can hear me, I'm ready to be.
I can see you and hear you, and I'll swear you in now if you'd like. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm John Maslin, as you can see from my Zoom screen, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant and would just like to add and hopefully not repeat a few things that Mr. Batchelder touched on in the city's presentation. First, as the board's aware, the test under 54-110 is equally or more appropriate. And as you can see on the screen, and Mr. Batchelder, could you go back a couple of slides to the north view of East Bay Street that we were looking at a moment ago? That's fine, thank you. Just a little bit more detail about this unit. It's as has been pointed out, it's been 3 accommodations units now since 2018. Before that, there were 2 accommodations uses here. There was a small space that was reserved for commercial use, and it's kind of a quirky outlier in this area. It's about 1,800 square feet. My client tells me that it has not been used as an office since about 2016. That about a year ago, he briefly had a hair salon there that came and went pretty quickly, but because of the location and the surrounding properties, it's just really not desirable as commercial space. As you've seen, it's across the street from the Ports Authority warehouse. Across Gennard Street, there's going to be a 50-room hotel. The horse stables would be to the west of it. Behind it is a spa and then a bar and restaurant. So as far as restaurant goes, as far as office space goes, it's really no market for it. The market just has not responded to my client's attempts to lease it. As far as retail, as Mr. Batchelder said, it's not street level storefront retail. It's tucked back in there. And so he really can't make any reasonable use of it except for the accommodations use. The market has responded well to it. The 3 units do quite well. As Mr. Morrison pointed out, this really is not a proliferation of mini hotels, as was pointed out in the Preservation Authority's letter. I would submit to the board that this isn't the problem that the accommodation ordinance was trying to cure, that it's not displacing any vibrant commercial space, no office space, no storefront retail space. It's really just some underutilized space that my client is trying to put to good, reasonable commercial use. It's located just a block off the market. As everybody knows, there are a number of hotels there now. Several more are planned, not just the one across Kennard, but one on the old First Baptist lot and other locations. So actually, in addition to the fact that this request would make it less non-conforming than it is now, going from 3 units to 4, but also it is equally and more appropriate for this district because of the number of accommodations units that are there now. As far as the opposition being an intensification of the existing unit, in addition to the fact that this really isn't the focus or the purpose of the accommodations overlay zone and the minimum number of units required there, in some ways, forcing a use of this as some sort of commercial space, be it office or retail, would actually result in some more intense demands, for instance, on the parking. Mr. Batchelder has pointed out that there's good parking available there, but for an office use would probably require many more spaces than adding a single accommodations unit. And also there would be people likely there more hours of the day using it as office or retail than they will be as accommodations, because presumably they'll spend a fair amount of that time sleeping. So for all of those reasons, on behalf of the applicant, we think that this is clearly and equally, if not more appropriate use of this space, especially in light of what's around it, what's coming to it. And we'd ask that the board approve the special exception under 54-110C. Be happy to answer any questions if I can.
Any questions for Mr. Maslon? Anyone else wish to speak on behalf of the application?
Mr. Robinson, we did have someone that signed up on behalf of this application. I think it's one of the staff persons with the owner, Marie Del Gelpio. May not be pronouncing her name correctly.
That's Councilmember Del Chapo, and I'll ask
Okay.
her to, or allow her to speak.
Okay, Del
And-
Chapo. Okay, thank you.
And if you can hear me, I'll be happy to swear you in.
Yes, I can.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
So I don't want to, repeat everything that Mr. Batchelder and Mr. Maslon have said, but, being in this area quite a bit, I think that a accommodations use is the least amount of impact in this area and in the surrounding community, as opposed to a commercial use, like Mr. Maslon said, where there's going to be cars coming in, all day, every day, and generating more traffic and more of a squeeze in this area. An accommodations use, most of the guests don't even drive to stay here because they are in such close proximity to everything you want to be at when you visit downtown Charleston. So much less impact. It's not taking away from the housing stock, which was one of council's biggest concerns when they went through and did the short-term ordinance. So feel as though this is also not in the center of a residential area. I very much understand and sympathize with the concerns of having a typical short-term rental right next door to you. This is a little bit more removed. And on top of that, the price point at which these suites are rented, you're not getting, a bachelor party and an activity like that happening. So for that, I would support this happening at the edge of Anson Borough and moving into the market area.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the board? Is there anyone else present wishing to speak on behalf of the application?
We have,
In opposition?
In opposition, we have John Ramos, Stephen Ramos,
in
that
opposition?
signed up to speak.
In opposition?
Yes, sir.
He's not on anymore. I don't-
Okay. He signed up, you know.
Huh. And then we have Erin Minigan is on,
Yes, Aaron.
so will allow her.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Batchelder, for reading our statement earlier. We were able to
One moment,
speak.
please.
Let me,
Sure,
Need to be sworn in.
absolutely.
do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. All right, I just wanted to say that the Preservation Society was able to speak with the applicant earlier today. And so in addition to the statement, we do have a few more comments to share. So the Preservation Society would like to thank the applicant for reaching out to us. And while we appreciate his position, given the difficulty renting the space, we have worked for years with the city to develop strong hotel and short-term rental ordinances with the intent to preserve as much long-term residential and office space as possible. And therefore, we cannot support this request to further intensify an existing non-conforming accommodations use. When the accommodations ordinance was recently revised and strengthened, the minimum number of 10 sleeping units was analyzed closely as appropriate to maintain a reasonable and sustainable volume of accommodation units in the city. Thus, we cannot support the expansion of this non-conforming use, which we feel is an unreasonable intensification. So we urge the board to uphold the intent of the accommodations ordinance and deny this request. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Is there any other opposition present?
No, Mr. Robinson, no other opposition.
In response, Mr. Maslany.
Thank you, Chairman Robinson, and we appreciate the comments. The additional thing that I would note for the board's consideration is the Historic Charleston Foundation has got an easement on this building and has chosen not to oppose this. So I'd like to point out that while we appreciate and understand the Preservation Society's position, Historic Charleston has not challenged the application, and it is, as we understand it, consistent with the covenants on the building. And so we'd like the board to consider that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments, or motions from the board?
I have a comment with regard to the Preservation Society's position. It seems to me that if we allow this one, where will it ever end? You know, because if they wanted to add another, you know, a 5th unit or a 6th unit, it's still going to be going up towards that 10 unit new requirement. But what it is doing, it is in fact, I believe, further intensifying the area. And it is very close to a residential neighborhood. You know, it's 1 block away from Anson Borough. And I just don't understand how, when it's already non-conforming, that we would allow yet a further non-conforming. And it doesn't seem to me that it would be equally or more appropriate, because it is further intensifying the accommodations use in that area.
Any other comments, questions? Ms. Richards, to expand a non-conforming use is a tricky thing. In this particular case, this building and this approvals that have already been received make this very unique. I can't see it really establishing a precedent in this case, because we've already approved 3 units, and you've got, I think Mr. Massillon used the word outliers, an outlier space that's right there in the corner on the first floor that really challenges it to be used for commercial purposes.
Right, but that was all before the, the recent council ratification in 2019.
I personally don't see it as an over intensification in this particular case because of the circumstances surrounding the building already.
I would like to follow up on Ms. Richards' comment to ask, what if, what if they do come back for another unit? That is a concern of, then do we go back and say, well, we did it, we expanded the non-conforming use again, and then, so, I mean, it is a concern. I agree with that.
Mr. Chairman, would I be out of order if I addressed just one factual issue?
Yes, sir, you would, unless someone asked you a question.
Okay.
Any other comments? Any questions? Any motions?
I'll move approval.
Mr. Morrison moves for approval. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Judon. All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Morrison,
Aye.
Mr. Judon,
Aye.
Ms. Grass,
No,
Ms. Richards,
Nay.
Ms. Vargas,
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. By a vote of 5-2, the motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that concludes the agenda. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you.
Night.
you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Nice seeing